Hey, Ben.
Sorry, guys. So, as I was saying, I'm just practicing my ventriloquism, I guess. Sorry, guys. Welcome to the Pantheon stream for February 4th, 2021. I'm your host and producer, Ben Dean. With me, as always, is Dave Ronick-Schlau, Senior Content Creator. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Ben. How you doing?
Good. Better now that I can speak. And we have with us Joppa, the Creative Director.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you again.
And making his first debut, we've got Nefel joining us. Hey, Nefel.
Hey, everybody.
So, as most of you probably know, it is a special stream for us today because we are going deep into crafting for one of the very first times. And definitely the first time since Nefel has joined us. Nefel joined us back in November of last year and has been working steadily at getting our crafting system up and running in the game. So there's actually something that like a workable system in the game, which is fantastic right now. And just a quick background on Nefel as well. He was, like many of you, he was a member of our community, and he was plucked from the community like a strand of tuber for a fledgling wizard's britches. It's a tender story of how he came to be. So we're going to start off a little bit differently today. Today, before we get into the crafting stuff, we are going to give you the patch notes. Dave, do you have a patch note song?
Oh man, I know. Patch notes.
Beautiful. Chris, what are our patch notes this week?
All right, so we're keeping this pretty short and sweet. We had a big eval dungeon stream where we showed off a lot of the fruit of the work that we've done, but just to highlight some of the key points, we added in a new projectile system. This is a post-refactor working of the projectile system for players and NPCs. We finished our hover animation suite, which you saw with the first true artifact with an intact mitigation schema. That's Hayaket's Eye that you saw if you've seen the stream. And that particular artifact actually provides a slow fall effect and a curse-based spell reflect nullification. So if you're dealing with a spell reflect that is a curse-based spell reflect, then that artifact will actually nullify that. But the hover suite is part of the aesthetics of that artifact. We have a lot of improvements to the AI pursuit code and how the quality of AI pursuit. We updated our audio trigger system, which you probably heard some fruit of that in the stream. The pyrophobic disposition came online. This is, again, our first post-refactor disposition, fully functioning and on display.
And how cool is that?
Still a lot of improvements to come to that, but it was really exciting to be able to show that off. We have improvements to camera, zooming, and first-person perspective. We have a brand new dynamic tooltip system, which one of the things I'm most excited about. This provides real-time changes to your tooltip information based on all pertinent stat changes. So you get an increase in a particular attribute or a bonus to, direct bonus to healing or a debuff or something like that. You'll be able to see now in real time the damage, the healing, the duration, the different things of your abilities, the tooltips. We've done some adjustments to how buffs and debuffs are displayed on NPCs, on their nameplates and on the target windows, which you'll see in upcoming gameplay videos. And last before our feature focus for today, melee combat now respects positioning, or at least another layer of positioning. So now defenders can no longer shield block, dodge, or parry when being attacked from behind, except for monks. Monks are the exception to that. And this is just tip of the iceberg stuff, meant to be quick, kind of an overview to just to remind that there's lots of work being done all the time. And again, a lot of the fruit we can see in EBD, and there have been improvements on those things even since then. So last note here is our base harvesting and crafting system being brought online to spec. And here today, as Ben said, we have our very own harvesting and crafting expert extraordinaire who is going to go even deeper. So take it away.
All right. Wow. Yeah, that was an intro. So thanks, Joppa. Thanks, everybody. I want to be upfront with everybody before we really dive into this. So Joppa in that patch note mentioned that it was the base harvesting and crafting system that came online, and it is a very base system. It is the fundamental engine that's going to drive everything else. So just looking through some of the questions that you all submitted for the stream, there's a lot of questions about gameplay, a lot of questions about content, about progression. Where we are in implementation is we're still working on getting the nuts and bolts of crafting into the game, the underlying engine that actually creates the items that you're going to be making. The rules that govern harvesting items out of the nodes and the other things that you'll find in the game. So what you're going to hear about tonight is going to be very fundamental. It's going to be very basic. And as we go further in development, as we implement more and more things in the game, you're going to see it evolve over time until eventually you do get to see that full experience with everything that you associate with crafting and gathering. But just to set expectations, it is really about the fundamentals tonight. So anyway, I wanted to start off by kind of just talking about what our goals are with the crafting system, and Japa, I'd love for you to chime in here as well. But we want crafting and gathering to be an integral part of the experience. So we don't really want it to feel like a side game. We want it to feel like it's a part of Pantheon, just like perception is a part of Pantheon. It's kind of it's a different way to experience the world, but it's just as important and fully fleshed out as any other part of the game. So it's very important for us that it really meshes well with adventuring, with perception, with all the other things that we're putting into the game, and that it really feels like a full-fledged experience on its own. Our second design goal that really is very important to us is we want to have a symbiotic relationship between crafting and adventuring. We don't want to be in this constant tug of war where people are saying, well, loot should be better or crafted should be better, but we really want there to be this sort of symbiotic relationship, both sides needing the other, and viable choices, whether you loot an item from a boss or maybe you loot a component that you craft into an item. We want all of that to feel really natural and not feel like one side is being prioritized more highly than the other. And then finally, and this is kind of a personal thing for me, but we don't want crafting to just be about selling your stuff to other players. In a lot of MMOs, it gets implemented with the idea that that's all that crafting is about. It's about just making things for players and selling items and making money. And while that's important, and we definitely want to enable an in-game economy, we also want crafting to be part of the world. We want it to matter in the context of the NPCs that you run across and the factions that you work with out there in the game world and the storylines that you experience as you play through the game. So, it really is meant to be part of the world and to be a very full-fledged experience. So I'll pause for a moment. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Well, you're off to a great start. Definitely really important philosophical and kind of DNA-oriented information. The only thing I'll add is just to genuinely add to what you're saying, which is, and you're about to get into this too in more detail, but it's for both crafting and perception. It's trying to build an actual persona that you can inhabit and become. So many games approach crafting, for example, with just a very simple click combine system, and it's all about the items that you make, and it's not really about the feeling of becoming that by trade, as an actual persona. So one of the things I love about kind of the way that the crafting system is developing is it really at the heart, it's about becoming a tradesperson. And so I'll leave it at that, but that gets me excited, and I'll let you keep going.
Awesome. All right. So in a minute, we're going to roll a video clip here, and we're going to start off by talking about cooking. But before, let me preface this. What you're going to see in the video clip, again, is very, very basic. It is not final gameplay at all. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of just building out a UI to even support it. So just when you watch this video clip, and as you hear me talking about it, just understand that this is really early days, and there's going to be a lot of evolution that happens after that. But when we think about crafting in Pantheon, we actually split it into two separate sort of systems. There is crafting equipment and finished items. So that's weapons and armor and clothing and jewelry and things like that, things that you equip on your character and that you use. And then there is crafting consumables, and that's things like food or potions or any number of other items. And we actually approach very, very differently. So in terms of professions, for example, cooking and alchemy work differently than blacksmithing or tailoring or woodworking or any other things like that. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through this video. So Ben, if you could cue up the cooking video, we can take a look at that.
Absolutely. Here we go.
You got a really good looking model.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's all about Ronik. Okay, so in this video, what we did is we gave Ronik a selection of different ingredients and then set him loose in the kitchen. And thankfully, he didn't burn the castle down. But what is unique about cooking in Pantheon is that each ingredient is actually going to have some stats that it contributes to the final product that you make. And what you're seeing here is just some very simple cooking actions that Ronik is taking, where he's, cooking up some fish and then, adding a few optional ingredients to that. But every time he does this, the effect that is generated by the food actually changes. What we have in game right now is still pretty primitive. But eventually you as a provisioner will be able to design your own food essentially by choosing different ingredients that emphasize the things that you want to get out of it. So maybe you want to create a food item that gives good bonuses for your tank, or maybe you want to create a food item that gives you some resist or some speed bonuses. So this is what cooking will allow you to do, and alchemy will be able to do the same sort of thing with potions, but it's really giving you those building blocks and allowing you to put things together in a way that's unique to you. Along with that, and this is important for the rest of the world, but ingredients will be regional, meaning that if you start off in Kingsreach, you'll have a set of ingredients that are easily available to you that grow on Kingsreach or that can be collected on Kingsreach. But if you start off over in Rainfall, maybe you're a Dark Myr, you're going to have an entirely different set of ingredients to work with. And that means that as you play through the game and as you travel, you're going to start to find more and more interesting things and interesting combinations that you can pull together. So this is a system we're really excited about. It gives players a lot of flexibility and a lot of room to experiment and find the combinations that work best for them. And it's something that we think is going to work very, very well for making consumables matter at all levels of play within Pantheon. So I don't know if Chris, do you have?
I'll jump in if I've got something, but no.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
All right. So yeah, that's cooking. I hope you guys are as excited about that as we are. Alchemy is going to be very similar, and we really are looking to make those unique. One of the common concerns that we have heard about, and that I've personally seen in other games, is, that consumables only matter at max level. And so one of the reasons we're setting the system up this way is so that consumables can really matter at all levels and be important and useful to players at all levels. Now, we have to be careful. We don't want them to become too overpowering because we don't want people to feel like it's required to go be a provisioner. But, we have a lot of flexibility in terms of stats and in terms of the way that Pantheon stats work to give you some really interesting combinations to work with. All right, so for my next trick, we're actually going to talk about gathering. So Ben, if you could roll the gathering video.
And we're going.
All right, so in this video, again, Ronik agreed to be our guinea pig, and we dropped him down in a pit with some mining nodes and told him to mine those nodes. And as you can see, it took him a moment to figure out that he needed to equip his pickaxe there. But this is probably the most simple form of gathering. As you can see, there's no gameplay associated with this yet. It's just clicking on a node. But the important thing to notice is that he's getting unrefined ore out of that node. So instead of getting, chunks of iron or nuggets of silver or whatever else, he's getting this unrefined ore that he's going to have to go and actually smelt down to turn into usable materials. That's important for a couple of reasons. The first is that it allows us to do some interesting things with our gathering system, where if you are in a risky area, or maybe you just get a little lucky, you might get some better quality ore. Instead of every node being the same, nodes can have different results based on where they are or the conditions around them. It also allows us to very easily tune the number or the amount of resources that are entering the economy. So I know a lot of you are very concerned about the game's economy. You've asked a lot of questions around it. And one of the things that we want to do at every step of the way in our crafting and gathering system is ensure that we have the capability to tune that economy, to make sure that things aren't too scarce, but that we're not flooding the economy with those resources at the same time. So this gives us the ability to do that. Finally, if you're somebody who just likes to gather and you don't really want to do that whole crafting thing, this allows you to go out there and be that gatherer. Whether we're talking about mining or wood cutting or even fishing, you gather those raw, unrefined resources and you can bring them back and then sell them or trade them to other players who will take them and use them in some way. So we want gathering to really feel like a full-fledged part of what we're calling the crafting sphere. And it's important that we start with just these basic interactions, these basic experiences.
I got a rare there, didn't I?
You did get a rare. So
Yeah,
that's
first try.
That's the other thing to mention is you may not have caught it. So Ben, I don't know if you want to run that video again really quick, just to give them another chance to see it. But when Ronak is mining, he actually gets a rare result. In addition to the chunk of ore that he pulls out of that node, he gets some Celestium dust as well. And if you guys haven't seen it on the forums, Celestium is going to be very important in the crafting process for customizing the stats of the items that you make.
First try, baby. I'm going to Vegas.
Nice.
That's right. All right. Okay, so in a moment we have a video where we watch Ronak actually forge himself a weapon, and it's a little bit of a longer video. So before we start in on that, I want to make sure that everybody understands that in most other MMOs out there, you have a recipe for an item. Let's say you have a recipe for a breastplate. You might have a recipe for a level 10 breastplate that takes bronze to make, and then a recipe for a level 20 breastplate that takes iron to make, or something along those lines. Pantheon is a little bit different. So in Pantheon, you will ultimately, choose to make a breastplate, but what you put into that breastplate is up to you, and you will pick and choose your ingredients, your materials that you use to get a desired result out of that. So maybe you might use cold dark steel because you really want that breastplate to offer a lot of protection. But using that cold dark steel comes at a cost. Maybe that resulting breastplate is very heavy. So maybe you decide, I don't need quite as much protection out of this breastplate because I'd like it to be a little bit lighter and I'd like to have some additional stats on it, and you use a different material instead. Both breastplates that you could choose there, and this is just a very simple example, they're both still viable, still useful, but you're not locked into specific stat ranges like you are in many other MMOs. So as a crafter, you're going to be paying a lot of attention to what materials you're using. You're going to be out there looking for those exotic materials that get you the best bonuses for whatever you're going for. And then you're going to be bringing that back and really creating these customized items for either yourself or to sell, or maybe for a friend or a guildmate that really meet a very specific need or have a very specific stat allocation. There's a lot of flexibility in the system, and that's on purpose. The idea is that Pantheon is going to be a game where you care about your stats a little bit more than you might in another game. And it's going to give you as a player the freedom to really tweak your character and tweak your build in the way that's most effective for you and the way that you want to play the game. So that's the preface. Let's go ahead and roll the blacksmithing video, and I will talk through it.
Okay.
And give you guys an idea of what's going on. Okay, so as we start off this blacksmithing video, the first thing that Ronak is doing is he's smelting down all that ore that he gathered earlier because he needs to get some iron out of it. Now, what we have in the game right now is very, very simple. And so really there's only iron to work with, but you can imagine in the final game, you might have anywhere from 8 to 12 different kinds of metals that you can choose from when you're crafting something. So smelting down this ore is going to get Ronak some quantity of iron. and it might also get him some other resources as well. And then he'll be able to take that iron and use it to start making different kinds of components.
Silver nuggets.
So, yeah, there you go. So he's, if you didn't notice, he's also getting some silver nuggets out of this ore that he's smelting. So it's sort of a bonus resource. So once he's got this, and I'm watching the video to make sure that we actually get to this point. But once he's got this this ore all smelted down, the next step is obviously turning it into something that can be used, because a chunk of ore by itself is not super useful for making a weapon. The way that we handle almost every type of crafting within Pantheon is we have an item that I call a schematic item, and that could be a cast or a mold or a pattern or any sort of item along those lines. You think of it as it's the template that you would use to create like a sword blade or a sword hilt or a shield blank or any sort of component that you might use to make a finished item. Those schematics are really important. They're going to be base level schematics that you can easily find in the world. You can buy them from NPCs. You can pick them up in various places, but then there's also going to be rare versions that make more interesting and unique components. Your base level schematic might make you a Thronefast style sword or a King's Reach style sword. But if you want, an Elven Royal Guard blade, it's going to be a little harder to find the schematic for that. So you'll be able to get some rare versions of schematics as well as you go. Now, what Ronak is doing here is he's actually creating a sword blade, and he's using the Celestium Dust of Might that he picked up earlier. And what that is going to do is actually create that. I'm sorry, he's not creating the sword blade yet. He's creating the metal bar. But that metal bar is going to have a stat bonus attached to it. That Celestium Dust of Might actually gives him a stat bonus on that bar. And there are many different kinds of Celestium Dust out there that he can use to get different kinds of stat bonuses. Once he has completed that metal bar, he'll use a couple of those to make a sword blade. And the sword blade will inherit the stat bonuses that the metal bars had. So not only does the fact that he's making an iron bar matter for his sword blade, and he's going to get stats on his finished weapon because he used iron in its construction, but he's also going to get bonus stats because he used Celestium as part of the process.
You'll see I'm a crafting noob as well as an adventuring noob.
That's right. Lots of clicking around trying to get things to work.
You didn't die though, Ronak.
Not yet.
At least not in the footage that we've seen.
No, we don't have exploding forges in yet. I know several people have asked on the forums if we're going to have that. We thought about it, and I think the jury's still out. We might make it only explode when Ronak's crafting. We'll just have to see. Or
if you're standing near, Ronak when he's crafting, you could take some pretty serious blast damage.
Yeah. So if you missed that in the video just then, he was creating iron bars of prowess, which is a different kind of Celestium dust. So what he's doing now, or I think I'm a little behind the video, but he's actually putting a weapon together. And in a moment, we will see Ronak compare two different weapons. One of those weapons was made with an iron bar that he created and with just a basic sword hilt. I can't talk. The other weapon used a crafted sword hilt and some Celestium shards of the Inferno. So you can see he's equipping both weapons there and showing you the difference in stats. And I want to talk for a moment about that hilt component, because that's where we introduce interdependency in Pantheon's crafting. So every profession in Pantheon will be able to create items on their own without having to rely on other players. They'll have all of the pieces and parts that they'll need to create the vast majority of their items. However, if you want to make a truly awesome item, if you want to make something that has better stats or that's more of a premium type of item, it's to your advantage to work with other crafting professions. So if you're that blacksmith making a sword, you can make a basic sword all by yourself. But if you happen to know an outfitter, or you go talk to an outfitter and you get them to make you a fancier sword hilt, that resulting sword that you're going to get is going to have slightly better stats. It's going to be just a little bit stronger, not by a lot, but enough so that there's a difference there, and we're encouraging interdependence. Now, if you're just making a bunch of swords because you want to use those to build your faction with the guards, you don't necessarily need to go get that crafted sword hilt for that. But if you're making a sword for your guild's main tank rogue friend, maybe that's something that you want to do because you can get them a better item. And then the last but in the video, you saw that one of those swords used Celestium Shards of the Inferno, and what that actually did, we didn't have the opportunity to record it, but what it actually did was it gave that sword a fire proc, so that if Roenick were to take that sword into combat, there would be an explosion that occurred, hopefully in his enemy's face and not his own, but there would be actually a proc on that sword. So that's just a very, very basic example of the kind of customization that you can do in Pantheon's crafting system. I know I was a little bit out of sync with the video, but hopefully that kind of gives you guys an idea of the potential of the system that we're building here. And it's something that as we flesh this out, as we build gameplay around it, it's going to become a very rich system. We want to make crafting a very engaging experience for everyone, where you care about every item that you make, and as a crafter, that you really get into it and make something very unique and special that's going to help you stand out among your peers.
I love that. I mean, it's what we talk about as far as the social aspect of the game. The other games that I've enjoyed, crafting when you can depend on other crafters or other, you may not be a blacksmith, but your friend is, again, the social aspect is what we're keying in on there.
Awesome. So I know a bunch of you submitted questions on the forums, and we've picked out a few of those. We don't have time to get to everybody in the stream. There were a lot of questions. But the commitment that I think we're going to try to make is we'll answer a few of them here in the stream, and then we'll actually respond in the forums to as many as we can to try to help make sure that everybody's questions get answered as much as is possible. There's a lot of things that are still in development or that aren't completely decided yet, and we'll have to be a little vague on those, but we'll try to get as much information out there as we can. So Roenick, I think you've got the questions, sir. You want to read them off?
I do. I've edited a few. We've edited a few of these because y'all like to talk more than Justin. So let's start with let's start with Valerie, who asked, "Will there be crafting quests?" He has a 3-part question. Will there be crafting quests? What's the penalty for failing a craft? Will players like me explode? And will harvested resources be tradable? So we answered some of that, but...
Yeah, so let me just, I'll take those kind of in order. So there will absolutely be crafting related quests, and there will be different types of quests. So some of those will be simple tasks that you can do to maybe gain a little money or a little faction, or maybe other things. Where maybe that's what I talked about, where you're making some swords for the guards or something like that. But there will also be some longer form quests, some more involved storylines that you might do in order to learn a new skill or to get a better crafting tool, or even just because it's out there in the world and somebody needs your help. So there will definitely be content in the form of quests and tasks and storylines. It's going to span the gamut of everything that you can imagine there. One thing we will not do, we're going to try not to gate progression on completing content. So if you're the type of player that just wants to do your own thing, you don't really want to go out there and do all this questing, we're not going to require you to do that in order to progress. But if you do enjoy doing this sort of content, it is going to help you in your progression. As far as penalties go, that's still kind of to be determined. Penalties are the very last things that we're actually going to put in, because we want that penalty to really feel right. We don't want it to feel too harsh, like it's going to prevent somebody new from learning how to use the system, but we also don't want it to be too easy either. So that's one of the things that we kind of tune at the end. It's still TBD. We probably won't have explosions be a common penalty. So you won't necessarily see people blowing themselves up all the time, unless, of course, they happen to be at a specific place where that might be a risk factor, like, I don't know, maybe the Forge and Amber Fate, but probably not something that you'll see on a constant basis. In terms of harvested resources being tradable, absolutely yes. We do not want to start trying to restrict the ability of people to buy and sell and trade in the economy. We want you to be able to go out there and be a gatherer and supply other players. We also don't want to get into a situation where everybody is hoarding a ton of crafting materials that they have gathered themselves. So we really want to encourage that social aspect and encourage that interaction. All right, what's our next question?
Great. Hoye wants to know, how will interdependency between crafters work, and will the professions be balanced in terms of their economic potential? A mouthful.
Gotcha. So yeah, I talked about this a little bit with the Sword Hilt discussion, but interdependency is something that we want to have as an optional but desired aspect of the system. Again, everybody will be able to make finished items on their own. They'll be able to make items pretty much on their own as long as you can get all the materials together. However, if you choose to work with other players, you can potentially take those items just a slight bit further. In the context of things like swords and armor, choosing to work with another player to get the components that you need will allow you to make slightly stronger things. We're going to be very careful about balancing that so that we don't force you into interdependency if that's not something you're really interested in doing, but there will be a benefit to it. In terms of economic potential, this is something that's a little challenging. It's difficult to do because certain things just get used more than others by players. But in general, what we're trying to do is set up each profession so that they do have a good set of things that they can make that are economically viable. It's actually very, very important to us that we keep our economy viable even as the game ages. We don't want a situation where 2 or 3 years down the line, players coming in and starting new aren't able to sell anything useful. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to be very, very careful as we set up the professions, and then as we turn on the economy and really as that gets going. And we're going to be working to ensure that every crafting profession has some economic viability there, and that you don't have one that's much, much more viable than the others.
Great. Philo wants to know, will there be a, quote, mini game associated with crafting?
So in the broadest terms, I'll say yes. Mini game is not really the right way to describe it, but there will be gameplay associated with crafting. There will be skills to improve and abilities to learn and choose from and tools to equip and things like that. As we get more and more of the base aspects of the system in place, you'll start to see that gameplay evolve. Our goal for that gameplay is really to make sure that it is fun and engaging for the crafter, and that it's not something that can just become a mindless grind or that feels like a mindless grind. We want it to be interesting and challenging and fun all at the same time, just like we want combat to be for adventuring. And it's an area of the game that we'll be working very deeply on as we progress, and we'll be looking for player feedback during our testing phases to help us get there.
Awesome. I think you're going to make a lot of people happy. This is another multi-part question from Baron999. He wants to know, will gathering nodes be visible to everyone or only to the people with the right level of skills? He wants to know, how will gathering work in general? He wants to know, will there be an attempt to limit how much people can gather and carry? And will there be gathering related content, factions, and so on? And how many spider eyes will we be able to get from a spider?
That's not a 3-part question. That's like 17 questions. It's like the entire stream.
Just a few.
Good thing for us.
That was the edited version too. So Baron99 will have a special stream for you in 2 weeks. We'll send you no. Go ahead.
No, good thing for us is a lot of this was already covered. So
yeah. So yeah, just to try to answer some of these quickly. So in general, gathering nodes will be visible to everybody. So even if you don't have the skill, to gather something, you'll still be able to see it and tell your friends, hey, I see a node over there that you might want to gather, or, could somebody please come skin this dragon for me? Like there's, you will be able to do that. There may be some exceptions. We have the opportunity to be a little bit creative here. So you may find that more exotic materials that occur in more dangerous or remote places, like the tops of mountains or deep in caves or underwater, that you might need some special skills to kind of reveal those. But in general, that will be the exception and not the rule. The general rule is that nodes will be visible to everyone and the gathering opportunities will be visible to everyone. Gathering is, I talked about crafting gameplay. Well, gathering is going to have gameplay as well. It's going to be a little bit more involved than just clicking on a node repeatedly to get something out of it. We want that interaction to be really interesting and engaging and add to the experience. It's also going to allow us to introduce a little bit of risk. If you're out there in the world and you find that node of star metal, which is one of our top end kinds of resources, that's going to be a little more challenging to gather from than that copper node that's sitting out there next to the city gates, right? So we are going to have some gameplay associated with gathering, and just like crafting, we want it to really be meaningful and fun. So we'll be looking for a lot of feedback as we start to get that built in. In terms of the materials that you gather, weight and space will definitely be a factor. So a chunk of unrefined ore is not light. It's not the sort of thing that you have dozens and dozens of in your bags, right? If you start getting piles of it, you're probably going to find that it weighs a lot and it slows you way down. And this is really the approach that we're taking to sort of prevent people from over farming resources, is not to limit the number of nodes that you can find, although you will have to go out there and find them. But more to say, hey, you can only gather for so long before you have to stop and head back to town and drop off what you got. So there will be definitely some aspects there to help sort of throttle that gathering action. Also, one of the goals that we have for gathering, and this is going to be reflected in the crafting system, but it's really about quality and diversity rather than raw quantity. So it might be more to your advantage as a gatherer to gather a variety of different materials than to concentrate on just one thing. You could keep mining those iron nodes or getting that iron ore over and over and over and over. But at some point, you've probably got enough iron, and maybe you want to move on to a different kind of resource. So that's something to think about. Some of the other parts of the question, there will be gathering related content, just like there will be crafting related content. It's going to be the same kind of thing. So you'll find opportunities to use your gathering skills in the game world. And as far as spider eyes go, it's going to honestly depend on both the size of the spider and on your skill level in skinning. If you're not that great at skinning, you may only get one usable eye out of that spider.
Those are some of the most difficult eyes to remove,
They really are. But if you're a budding alchemist, they might be very useful for you. We'll just have to see. All right, okay. What's the next question?
All right, we got another 20-part question. This one from Darksaber8570. He wants to know, will there be a way for players to create contracts or work orders for each other? Will there be crafting tasks for NPCs to help players earn money or skill? Can you give us an outline of the different professions that are being considered? And will there be preferred combinations of gathering and crafting professions? Is that enough, or you want more of this one? There's one more. Can you talk about how crafting gameplay will work and we'll be able to produce items in bulk if they are something we need? So Darksaber, you and Baron, we'll get you guys together and we'll get a special stream for you just to answer your 50-part questions. No, Neff, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll actually take this a little bit out of order because we've already talked about some of this, but will there be ways for players to create contracts or work orders for each other? Honestly, that's something I would really love to dig into and look and see if we can, but it's not something we can commit to right now. It's just, it's a great idea. I think it would be an awesome addition to our economic systems, but it's definitely just it's something that we're going to have to get to later in development. We're just not there yet, and it might end up being something that we do or that we don't do. It's just going to depend on a lot of other things. So I want to be honest with everybody and transparent that awesome idea, love it, but can't commit. In terms of the different professions, I can give you guys a list, and we'll write this out on the forums later on. But crafting professions. So as a starting point, we reserve the right to change this or add to it. But as a starting point, there are going to be 6 crafting professions, and those are blacksmithing, outfitting, provisioning, alchemy, woodworking, and jewel crafting. Now, I'll caveat that within those professions, there are going to be opportunities for you to specialize in different aspects of what they do. So these professions are starting points. They are not the only decision that you will make as you progress through crafting. But those are the 6 that we're looking at right now to start with. We do reserve the right to potentially change those or add to them just depending on how things work out. As far as gathering goes, there are going to be 5 types of gathering, and those are mining, wood cutting, harvesting, skinning, and fishing. Now, again, we reserve the right to potentially add to that list. We have a couple of cool things that we've tossed around that might turn into additional gathering professions down the line, or they might turn into parts of the existing gathering professions. And just like the crafting professions, you will have opportunities to sort of specialize within these gathering professions as well. It won't be quite the same because gathering works differently from crafting, but there will be more to it than simply choosing a profession. Okay, so I probably lost my place here in the question. Oh, yeah. So as far as crafting and gathering working together, what we're trying to set up is that every gathering profession will create something that is useful to every crafting profession. Now, there will be differences in terms of how much is useful. For example, if you're a blacksmith, you're probably going to be working very closely with a miner for most of what you do because that's just what you use. Or if you are a woodworker, you're probably going to leverage a lot of wood in what you do. But there will be materials that come from other gathering professions that will be useful to you and that you will have a desire to get. What that means as a player is that if you're choosing which gathering professions to work on, you can really have the freedom to pick any combination that you want. You won't be forced into, choosing to be a miner because you decided to be a blacksmith also. We want to give you the freedom of choice there and let you sort of chart your own path. So that's how those will work. And then I'm just looking at the question again for combinations gathering. As far as bulk production goes, which is the last thing that we haven't really talked about, that's something that we're going to be looking at as we flesh out the system. In general, we don't necessarily want players to be doing a lot of bulk production because that can lead to some weird economic situations. But if there's an item like, say, for example, metal bars that you would potentially use a lot of as a crafter, we do want to make that process, easy and fun for you as a crafter to do. So there will likely be some options there. We'll know more about that as we get further along in the process of building out that gameplay loop. We don't want to force somebody to sit there and craft the same item over and over and over again. So we're definitely sensitive to that. Was that the last question, Runic, or did we have one more?
I think that was it.
I think so.
Ben, do we have time for some
questions
from the chat?
We're running over our 45-minute goal here, but that's all right. Let's take a couple, maybe for about 5 minutes or so.
Sure. Did you see any, or I can throw some out there?
Yeah, well, there's tons. One of the first ones that came up was, are you going to be able to? I think it was already sort of answered. Though, are we going to be able to sort of cap everything?
Are we going to be able to cap everything? So this is something that's still kind of TBD, but right now what we're leaning towards for crafting is that you will choose a single profession and then you will specialize within it. In terms for gathering, we're going to work it a little bit differently. And again, this may change. So I want to be really clear with everybody that this is not set in stone yet. But gathering, what we're looking at potentially doing is allowing you to pick up the basics of every gathering profession and then limit how much you can specialize. So, you could get the basics of all 5 gathering professions, but you might decide that you want to specialize, for example, in mining and woodcutting, or you might decide to specialize in fishing and harvesting. So you have that way. There's still some distinction between players, and it's not an everybody can do everything sort of situation. Again, not set in stone. This is just kind of what we're looking at right now, and it may very well change as we get further in development.
Cool. Here's a good one, I think. Nathan, the real Nathan Napon wants to know, are we looking at crafting leveling up at a slower pace, like old school MMOs, like a full-time job investment type thing? How do you see the pacing going, I guess is the...
That's a really good question. So progression is actually one of the things that we sort of work out after we have a lot of other stuff done. And it's not really something that we haven't really put a number around it yet. I think ultimately we want crafting to feel meaningful, and we want the progression to feel meaningful. And so, the pacing will be similar to what we would expect for adventuring classes, but a lot of that is going to depend on how much there is for you to craft and how long that progression is. It's, there's a difference between having 50 levels worth of something and maybe only having 20 levels worth of something. And so that's still very much TBD. But as we get further, we do want to make that progression really feel meaningful. We don't want it to be too easy. We also don't want it to be too hard.
Remember too, with the emphasis on making sure that crafting is viable and helpful and meaningful at all levels, there's not going to be as much of a top-heavy, goal that's just always kind of, fish hooking you to the end. So it's not so much about reaching max level as an ultimate prime directive, as much as there being really important things all along the way that you can provide as a crafter of any profession.
Yep, absolutely.
Can we lose a potential rare crafting component while crafting?
Honestly, it's TBD. It's gonna ultimately we'll make that decision based on what feels right in terms of the penalty for failure, but also based on the economy as well. Does it make sense to do that, or is it too much of a penalty for players? That's going to be a very informed decision that we ultimately make, but we haven't made it yet.
This is a good question. Actually, maybe Joppa, you could kind of answer this one too. Highwind5574 wants to know, how important do you foresee consumable items like potions, oils, etc. being in Pantheon? We kind of touched upon it a little bit, but maybe, I don't know if we want to talk about it a little further.
Neff, you want to start?
Yeah, so, what we don't want to do is we don't want to create a situation where you have to have a utility belt full of potions before you go into any encounter. So we want those consumable items to be meaningful and to feel special and useful. But we don't want to necessarily get into a situation where everyone's carrying around stacks of them, because that would just be a little silly. I think in terms of challenge, it really is about giving you another tool to use during those adventuring encounters. And we probably want to approach that in a way where even if you don't have those tools, you still have the opportunity and the ability to defeat the encounters. So, Jop, I'm not sure if you want to talk a little more about that, but that's where I come at it.
Yeah, it is one more lever, one more ingredient to put into the mix of all the things that have to go into whether or not you're prepared. So what we're constantly mindful of from a game design perspective is, when do you have too many levers? When do you have too many ingredients? When you're looking at stats, gear, buffs, acclimation, artifacts, the dispositions at play, and so on. When you start adding in consumables and other things on top of that, in some cases, you can push that too far. And so a lot of it is just really looking for the right balance and leveraging the limited action set as it pertains to things like consumables and in-combat usage, to try and keep a handle on how far, making sure that that overall combination of things doesn't get out of control.
That sort of leads into one of these other questions asking if stats or spells or anything else in the game can affect crafting and or its bonuses.
Yeah, so that's actually something that we haven't decided on yet. It's an interesting paradigm, for example, to if, for example, having high strength or high constitution might make you a better blacksmith, or having high dexterity might make you a better woodworker or something like that. There's some pretty cool things that you can do with that, but at the same time, you also start to get into a situation where, for example, if someone was playing a wizard and they hadn't emphasized those stats, you're sort of soft locking them out of choosing different crafting professions. So if there is an impact, it will not be very severe. It'll be more along the lines of just a very subtle change. But it's something that we haven't completely ruled it out yet. It's still TBD.
You can achieve some of the same kind of interesting diversity and player choice with the tools as well. And in some ways that's even of a cooler avenue to go down, because it's not as restrictive by how you've chosen to spend your stats or gear out, but it's more about, have you gotten that legendary mining pick, have you gotten that legendary mixing bowl, something like that. So
the old legendary mixing bowl.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I got one of those in the kitchen. So one of the other questions too, actually a lot of the questions were based around storage of crafting items. Have we given any thought into stuff like shared guild resources, or a separate crafting bank, or extra crafting slots in the inventory, that sort of thing?
So the answer is that's all still TBD. That's stuff that we'll get to much further down the line. I can say personally, my opinion is that if we have to start making special exceptions to handle crafting materials and handle the storage and transport of those materials, that we've probably done something wrong, where we either have too many materials or people need too much of them in order to craft. So I would rather make sure that we balance the system to work with the general inventory before we go start doing things like creating crafting bags or special crafting storage. But that's something that we'll be evaluating as things go on, and ultimately we'll make the choice that's right for the experience that we want to drive within the game.
Here's a good question. And we kind of saw it a little bit, but how are rare nodes going to work? What is stopping a few greedy people from camping the good nodes and making a mafia of them? So
that is a really good question. So there are two ways that's going to work. The first is that if you're looking for what I call an exotic material, which is, you could consider it like a rare node, a little bit different, but same general idea. It's not going to be as easy to find. It's not going to be just a percentage chance that a rare node appears in the same spot as some other node did. So if you really want to go out there looking, you're going to have to go off the beaten path. You're going to have to go into more dangerous areas. Those exotic materials are going to show up in, they might show up in extreme climates that you have to deal with, or they might be down in the depths of a dungeon and guarded by monsters or other NPCs. And even if you venture into those places, they may not be very easy to find. So that's sort of the first thing that will help keep the camping down necessarily. The other part about that is that the system we're setting up is not something that's going to be easily predictable. So, today that rare node might have spawned on top of a mountain in Avenir's Pass. Tomorrow, maybe it's somewhere in Fairthale. And there's going to be a lot of work put into the way that nodes spawn to make sure that they're not predictable, and that we reward players for actually going out and really discovering things rather than just running the same path that they always do. So, Jop, I don't know if you wanted to add some to that, but
no, it's a great answer. And the cool thing too, one of the things I love most about our crafting system is the customizability. I've said it before, I've never been a big crafter. But I'm actually genuinely excited about the crafting system in our game. And a lot of it is because of this concept of being able to, through the acquisition of rare and unique and diversified items, you as the crafter can decide what kind of outcome I want, and therefore where that leads you to find those different things and the kind of really interesting combinations of very unique and kind of off the beaten path ingredients you would need to acquire, and how unpredictable the how and where those things can be acquired, and even like time of day type things. I mean, that just open the doors of like things you can only harvest at night, special flowers that only grow in moonlight, these kinds of things that make it difficult to really get kind of a locked down, this is how, someone mentioned like the Devil Sword Mafia, and how avoiding this idea that you need these really important rare things. They always exist in this area and in this way, and so whoever's biggest and strongest and most present automatically gets it. I think we've got a really awesome system underneath that's going to naturally disperse a lot of that.
Great.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end it off tonight. Do you have any? Well, we probably can do one more question. Do you have one, Dave?
I thought it'd also be a good time to end, but somebody did have a cool idea. I don't think it's something we're considering, but I can't find it in the chat, but they wanted to know if there was a chance where another player could learn from another player, meaning like somebody was like a master crafter and there was like an apprentice crafter and you could learn from them or something like that. I don't know if that's something we're considered, but that sounds like a cool idea.
That is a really cool idea. It's not something that we've really talked about. So can't make any promises, but it is definitely a cool idea.
Yeah.
We'll just have to see how things go. I do want to just mention briefly, I know you guys had a lot of questions that we didn't get to. I do my best every week to answer questions on the forums. So if you have a question that's just burning in your brain and you really want to find out, please feel free to go post that on the forums. And if it's something that I can answer, I will. I know that Chris and Ben and Dave will also jump in and help with those answers as much as they're able as well. But there's just a lot to the crafting and gathering system in Pantheon, and this is going to be a journey that we're on. This is just the first step. So looking forward to talking with you guys again in the future.
Just want to say great job, Neff. Great job, David. Excellent stream. Excellent debut as our lead crafting designer and one of our game designers. So couldn't have done a better job. Excellent work.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to bring you on more often, sir. Thank you very much for that. And thanks for everybody for coming out today. Right after the show, I believe Pantheon Plus has a follow-up show to kind of go over some of this stuff. And I believe next week, Chris and Neff will also be doing a podcast with Disparate Worlds, if I'm not mistaken. So that'll be something to watch out for. Thanks again, all, for watching. Anyone, Dave, Chris, Neff, anything to sign off on?
No, I'm a huge crafter, so this was great for me to hear too.
I'm just gonna steal Chris's phrase and say onward and upward.
It is. See you, everybody.
Good night.
Take care.